Thank you. I have 4 children, and the oldest daughter just went off to university this fall. And I had the privilege of taking her and getting her settled into her new life. And as we were traveling and as we were going along, we were dealing with an issue that she was concerned about and wrestling with. Moving into a new situation, moving into a residence, she knew there would be a lot of introductory meetings and greetings and questions. And there was one question in particular that she was worried about because she wasn't quite sure how to answer it. And it's a simple question, really. For most people, they wouldn't have any difficulty, but for her, it wasn't so easy. And the question was simply this: so, Michaela, where are you from? And that's what she was wrestling with. Where was she from? She was born in Canada, lived there for a number of years, and then we lived in Baku, Azerbaijan for quite some time, and then she did her high schooling here in Basel. So where was she from? Now, for many, first-year students, that would have been easy to answer. But for her, she was wrestling with how to explain all of that. And I understand that because when we first moved to Azerbaijan, we were wrestling with those cross-cultural issues. And with that sense of place and displacement, where are we from and where are we now and how do we settle in and how do we deal with a different culture? How do we move into a community, not only to live, but to live and work with people around us? And I was in Turkey at a conference, and a friend of mine who was working in Slovakia gave me a magazine that he had picked up on Air Canada. And it had a little model in there about mobility and how culture travels in this day and age. And I was really intrigued with the model and began to work with it to see if I couldn't explain some of the things that I was going through and sort of how I was feeling as somebody who was a bit displaced. And then I began working with it in a variety of other ways to see how it might explain some of the things. And I want to use it tonight for looking at this idea of community and thinking about the people that are in community. So it's a simple 2x2 grid. And we have on the one axis this idea of mobility to immobility. So freedom to move around, freedom to live where you want versus no freedom to move or an immobility, not having any movement. And then we measure that mobility against the degree to which it's voluntary. So free to move or not free to move. And we come up with the 4 archetypes of mobility, these categories. So if you're able to move around and live anywhere that you want to and travel around the world, and you want to do all of that and you decide to do all of that, we would put you in the nomad category. And you have freedom of movement. If you want to travel around and see different places or live different places, or if you can do that, but you decide you want to stay where you are and where you know things, then we put you in the settler category. If you would like to stay where you are, but you're forced by external factors to move, then you become a refugee of one kind or another. And of course, if you're denied all of those freedoms of choice and movement, then we would call you a prisoner. Now, in the neighborhood where I live here in Basel, we have all 4 of these archetypes living right around us. We live in a small apartment building. We occupy the top 2 floors, and we're the nomads, of course. Right below us on the first floor is a lovely older Swiss couple who I'm going to call settlers because they've lived in Basel their whole life. Although he tells me, really, he's from much further away. He's from Mutens. So I put them in the settler category anyway. Down the street, a couple buildings, we have some families from Croatia. And the refugees from Yugoslavia peaked here in the mid-90s, early 2000s. And displaced by war and economic depression, they're still tied to their culture and their country, as is evidenced by the flags in their window and the decals on their car. And then down the street and around the corner is a psychiatric hospital and a home for physically and mentally challenged adults. And these people I would put in the prisoner category because they don't always have the choices to move, and in some cases can't move from where they are due to harm of themselves or perhaps other people. And so in our neighborhood, we have all 4 of these types living around us with different stories and different insights. It's not always as straightforward as that. We have a hybrid. I think of ourselves as a hybrid between nomad and settlers. As we try to learn the culture and settle in, we want to move towards that category. Somebody might look like a nomad because they've decided to come and work in Basel, but they might be more truly a refugee who just couldn't find a job somewhere else, and so this was the place they had to come. And quite often, teenagers of expat parents feel like prisoners because they were picked up and rooted from where they were settled, and they didn't want to come, and they don't want to stay, and they can't do anything about it. We tend to think of communities too often as static and unchanging things, when in reality, because of mobility, they are indeed very dynamic places. And we need to realize and understand sort of how mobility brings changes into communities. You change a community simply by moving into it. Your presence there is going to change and alter the dynamics. And you're changed by moving into that community. Its presence and force on you is going to change your thinking and your perspective and your ideas. And so what we really need to do is sort of learn from one another. The HSBC Bank recently did a survey of expats and their experiences around the world. And here was the headline in a website just recently in the last week about Switzerland. Switzerland is the worst place to make friends. Now, I don't think that's entirely fair to Swiss people. They weren't surveyed. I don't think that Swiss people actually have a problem making friends in Switzerland. This was a survey of how expats were feeling. And what it tells us is that community isn't instant, that friendship isn't instant. It takes work, and it takes bridge building, it takes understanding. And so friendship isn't everything about community, but it is one great indicator about community and how it develops. And so we have work to do. And I think by looking and understanding that we have these 4 archetypes around us and sort of being able to put people in categories to hear their stories and to hear their perspectives helps us enjoy community better. So the nomads offer an outsider's perspective. They're the adventurers, the explorers. They've seen many things. They have different ideas. I think of an astronaut who goes into outer space and has seen the world for the first time from a different perspective without geographical and political boundaries. And the images and pictures that astronauts have brought back to us have changed our perspective and the way we think about the world. Settlers, of course, offer an insider's perspective. Our life in Basel has been immensely enriched by our Swiss neighbors who've helped us find the rhythm of this community, reminding us this is garbage day. No, this is not garbage day because this is a holiday. This is Herbstmesse. This is where you buy the best asparagus when it's in season. And without those cultural interpreters, we just wouldn't have a greater sense of community in the place that we live. We desperately need their perspective. Refugees offer insights about value, about what's important. They've wrestled with what is significant in life, whether it's a forest fire in Australia or fleeing floods in China or fleeing war in Syria. Refugees have had to move and move quickly and take only what was valuable. They had to make choices and decisions in life under pressure about what they would keep and what would be significant to them. If your house was on fire and you could grab one thing as you went out, what would you take? It's a question of value. And when we listen to their stories, we have a greater sense of what's really significant and valuable in life. And prisoners offer us insight about meaning and significance. What do prisoners have more of than most people? Time. And what do we wrestle with? How do we spend our time? How do we spend our energy? How do we do something significant and meaningful in the culture and the community where we find ourselves? And oftentimes it's in listening to people who have been marginalized and hidden in society where we find deep meaning and significance. One of the most famous prisoners in the last half of the 20th century was Nelson Mandela, who emerged after 27 years in prison to give a new legacy to South Africa and a great change there based on what he had learned in his time away. And so we have all 4 of those operating, all 4 of those types in our community. And I think our job is to listen and to learn, to seek out those perspectives and to hear the stories that people have to tell. And that our sense of community is enriched and deepened by listening to one another. And tonight, as you hear the different speakers, you'll hear all of us, and at one time or another, we've been in all 4 of those categories. We bring our perspectives, we bring our stories, and the goal is that we might enrich one another and that our experience of community might be deeper. But it takes willing people, it takes the need to listen and to learn and the willingness to do so. Thank you for your time.